Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, students, faculty, alums, those joining us from all different parts of the country here at Seton Hall and at other universities or other parts of the community. We are in an unprecedented time, but the one advantage to holding a virtual event is the ability to bring in people from all over, and that's what we're doing today. My name is B.J. Schecter. I'm a professional in residence here at Seton Hall, building a sports media program. I'm also editor and publisher of Baseball America. Today's event is part of the Sports Media Speaker Series and is co-sponsored by the College of Communication and the Arts and the Stillman School of Business. In the College of Communication and the Arts, we work very closely with our friends at Stillman, and more specifically, the Center for Sport Management and Professor Charlie Grantham. Charlie and I have enjoyed a great personal and working relationship for many years, and we're teaching students from all angles, the media side and the business side, which are equally important today. This series is meant to educate our students and community with thoughtful and important discussions from leaders in the industry. Today, we're using the backdrop of a virtual classroom to have a very important dialogue. This afternoon's event is entitled COVID, College Hoops, and the College Sports Model. There's certainly a lot to discuss and unpack over the next hour. We're doing the speaker series during Black History Month, and diversity, inclusion, and race will be an important part of our discussion today. We will cover a lot in the next hour, and we will leave time for questions at the end, so have them ready. Before introducing our esteemed guests today, I would like to first introduce my co-host for this afternoon's event. I've introduced Bob Ley a number of times over the last several years, and I want to do something a little differently today. You all know who he is. One of the best sports journalists of our time with credentials that are unmatched. But what you may not know is that he's an even better person than a journalist, and that's saying something. And he deeply cares about Seton Hall University and educating and mentoring the next generation of journalists. As I read off the many list of accomplishments and accolades Bob has garnered over his career at our last live event, Bob joked that he wasn't dead yet. No, he certainly is not, and we are all very lucky to learn from him. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob Ley.
Thank you, Professor Schecter. I appreciate it. And I've been looking forward to this event for some time. Obviously, it's been a year of upheaval in American society, and college basketball has had a unique perch to participate and to see that. We mark time in the pandemic world by events. So last March, in the throat of the college basketball college conference tournament season, the sport was perhaps the most visible symbol of normalcy to be shuttered. So we're 11 months on. And we've struggled to define and live a new normal that changes day by day. And for college basketball, whose very economic organizational structure was already under scrutiny and assault, it is a crossroads time, as well as for the men and women in the game asserting their rights for social justice and reform. So a lot happening through the lens of a game that is suddenly a lot more than just 40 minutes of up and down the court. Jay Billis certainly knows this from his time at Duke, playing for Mike Krzyzewski, then coaching for Coach K on his staff, and earning a law degree, and over the past decade becoming the leading voice of intelligence and analysis in the game. Scott Burrell's stellar career at Connecticut led to a first-round NBA selection, also a first-round Major League Baseball selection, and he was the first athlete ever to achieve that distinction. Only Kyler Murray has since done that. 11 years in the NBA, he won a ring with the 1998 Chicago Bulls, and he won a place forever in American culture for his appearance in The Last Dance documentary. And for 6 years now, the head basketball coach at Southern Connecticut. It is great to have you guys here. In a nutshell, Scott, how would you describe these past months? And we should predicate it, and you'll tell us about it. I'm sure we can get into it. Your team is not playing the season. What have these months of the college basketball season been like for you who have played the game and coached the game?
Well, it's been hard because you get into coaching because you like teaching, you like the competition, and you like to pass on what you've learned and what you've been through to the younger generation. And the people COVID's really hurting in sports is the athletes, because they're not getting the same college experience that we all got. They're not building those bonds, those friendships, and they're not playing sports at the same time. So you really feel bad for them and what they're going through. And for Division II, in my school, those kids haven't played in a year, and mentally it takes a toll on them. So it's like you're a psychologist as well as a coach.
And Jay, we were chatting before we started. You mentioned that your ability just to eyeball things in person, of course, because of the protocols. What has this season been, if you could describe it?
Well, it's been a conflicting experience. On one hand, you're grateful that we're playing it all and we get to work. But on the other hand, when you start examining what we're doing with the backdrop of what we have always said, the narrative of what we said college sports is about, it's sort of laid bare what the industry really is, and it's a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. And I'm sure Scott will get into this, and we all can. But most of the public aren't thinking about the conditions under which these players are living. They're living in strict isolation, and the only time they're let out of the pen is to go to practice and to play. And the coaches, the tier 1 staff, the coaches and staff, they're all going home at night, but the players aren't. And that we haven't had you're having it now, and I commend Seton Hall and you for doing this, but we haven't had a national conversation, not on whether we can play, because we're showing we can, but whether we should. And we didn't have that conversation at the beginning, and frankly, outside of this, we're not having it now.
So what do you think the conditions, as you describe it, for the athletes will add, do, and change the velocity and the spin on the burgeoning athletes' right / college model can it survive discussion? Because we'd already seen the power of the NCAA, I think, shrink. I mean, almost to the verge of irrelevance. And now you've got, as you've described, something that is so existential and so elemental for these athletes. How does that affect the bigger issue, which was in place and percolating before the pandemic?
I think it'll accelerate it, Bob, a little bit. I also think it takes away or diminishes one of the NCAA's talking points, which is this is about education and all that stuff. This is about money. And you'll recall at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the administrators in college sports, whether they be in Indianapolis working for the NCAA office or administrators on different campuses across the country, said no students on campus, no college sports. And they also said, we will never play in a bubble. That's not what we're about. We are not the NBA. We are not pro sports, no bubbles. And what do we have? We have no students on campus for the most part, and we're going full speed ahead with college sports, specifically football and basketball. And we're, the NCAA has already trademarked battle in the bubble. I mean, they created a bubble in Indianapolis. The players are living in bubbles. The staff, and I'll say it again, the staff are not. The players are. And the biggest threat to player health as far as COVID is concerned is the staff, because they go home at night and bring the risk to the players. So it's a bizarre system that we have, which, to your original question, indicates that this is pro sports. This is not amateur sports. This is pro sports. We're playing this for money. And that's a good reason. Like, I'm traveling all over the country for money. I have a job, but for my job of being a college basketball commentator and an NBA draft analyst and all this stuff, I wouldn't be traveling around when the government's telling me not to. I'm doing this because it's my job.
Scott, how do you reconcile all those things that Jay just brought up?
I don't know if you can. It's true. It is about money. It's a big business. And a lot of teams, a lot of schools would fail if basketball wasn't played right now. Other sports would have to shut down if basketball and football weren't being played. So it's so true. It's a big business, but it's sad to say it kind of has to happen. And it's sad to say the kids are the pawns of this whole thing. Like Jay said, coaches do go home. They get to see their families. My kids came back to campus right after break, and they couldn't leave the rooms for 10 days. And now we can work out for another 2 more weeks. So that's like a month and a half this kid's been on campus without touching a basketball, going to class or taking classes online. It's like they're being imprisoned, and it's hard for them mentally, which is the sad part about it. Because they are quarantined, they should be able to play basketball as much as they want. Because number one, it keeps them together, and it keeps them away from other people that might have COVID or a better chance of getting COVID.
Jay, you just brought it up that we haven't had that conversation about should we be playing college basketball this season. There was some debate over college football, and we're having that debate right now. Coach K said strongly earlier this season he didn't think we should be playing. I'd be curious to what your view is, being so close to the game, and then after that yours too, Scott, as a team that is not playing.
Well, I hadn't heard Coach K say he didn't think we should be playing. My take on what he had said, it was after Duke had played Illinois, and I actually did that game and brought the issue up on air first, was the idea that of the national conversation, that is playing through this pandemic and putting the players in the position, they're the revenue drivers and they have to go into isolation in order to drive revenue. And really the rationalization that came up when we decided when the NCAA decided they were going to go forward and play, the rationalization then was, well, the players are safer playing than they would be otherwise if we just let them go home idea. And, wasn't that a convenient thing that the revenue drivers are safer driving revenue than not? But Coach K's stance, from what I understood, was we need to assess this. That maybe we should talk about delaying this for a while, a pause. It was just sort of the idea of, do we discuss this? And I can tell you, BJ, there was, privately when I would talk to coaches, whether it was at practice, before a game, or on the phone, whatever, it was almost universal, not quite universal, but almost universal. The coaches would say to me, "What are we doing? Like, what are we doing? I can't believe we're doing this." But they really didn't want to go out publicly and say it because they didn't want to be seen as one that would pull the plug or be advocating pulling the plug on all the money being driven. And so that was my biggest disappointment in this. Wasn't that the decision was to play, because ultimately I may make the same decision. I'm not saying it's wrong that we're doing it. The only thing I don't like is the idea that we've not had the discussion as to whether this is within our value system of what we say this should be. And then the other part is whether these institutions of higher learning have a civic responsibility within their community to say, we're not going to do anything like this that is going to contribute to community spread. In other words, in the Midwest, we're not going to play Big Ten football and have people gather, which they did in super spreader events that may not be in the stadium, but out of the stadium. And that's contributing to community spread. I do think that was part of this. And do the schools have any responsibility there? I just don't think we had enough discussion about that. And I think that was a failure.
Right. Scott, I was going to say, Scott, could you take us back to when the decision was made in your conference to not play, again, it's Division II, but what was the evolution of that? What sort of conversations were held? How much input do you feel you had, if any, and how was it explained to you? And then how did you explain it to the kids?
Well, they pushed it back to after break, when kids were coming back at the end of December after Christmas break. I think they figured, my opinion, they should have played it. If they're going to have a season, they should have played it when everybody went home like Division I did. But they pushed it back to when everybody came back to campus, beginning of January. And then we're going to have a abbreviated season. But with that being said, and that being done, there's no way you can have any chance for mistakes, because somebody's going to get it. And when one person gets it, it shuts down your team for 2 weeks or a week and a half. And if you abbreviate your season, you don't have enough time to finish it and play an NCAA tournament or play your conference tournament. So I don't know where they came up with that format for our season. The conference made the decision. The Northeast 10 made that decision. I wasn't talked to about it. I think some of the head coaches were, or the person who was in charge of talking to the conference face-to-face or on a computer was in charge of that. And they just thought the safety of the athlete would be in jeopardy if we did play. And I understand where they're coming from. But the hard part is every day my kids watch college basketball and they ask me, why can't we play? And some Division II teams are playing, and they're like, what coach? It's your fault we're not playing. They kind of blame me and my assistant for not playing, and it has nothing to do with us. It's a conference rule. It's a state situation. It's a school situation that we can't obviously overturn or go above and play.
Yeah. B.J., you've got some clarity, direct quotes, I guess, from what Mike Krzyzewski said
Yeah, I don't mean to put words in Coach K's mouth, but to your earlier point, Jay is right. He didn't come right out and say we shouldn't be playing. What he said was it doesn't feel right to anybody. Everyone is concerned. You were at that game. Did you have any discussion with him, Jay? About that? Did you feel the same way? And do you feel any differently now?
I had discussions with all kinds of coaches. So did I discuss it with him? I've discussed it with almost everybody I talked to in college basketball. And, that game, when Coach K said that was post game of the Illinois Duke game and the Big Ten ACC challenge. And it actually taught me a pretty good lesson about the way the world has changed. The media covering that game were not actually in the building. I was, but the media covering the game were listening to the game broadcast, and the game turned into not a blowout, but the outcome was decided, and my broadcast partner and I wound up talking about this issue, and I had brought up a few of these points that the players, the way college basketball is being put forth, the players have been essential workers, and they're tested daily. When healthcare workers on their own campuses weren't tested daily, so I brought up all those things, and Coach K was actually asked about what I said. So I don't think he brought it up on his own. He was doing it in response to something that was brought up on the broadcast that the media had heard first from me. But it was a sort of a familiar question that was being asked: is, are we doing the right thing? And that's the discussion I think we should have had. And, look at the lengths we're going to play this season. And when people say, well, the kids want to play. Well, I get that. I mean, one, I don't choose to call them kids because they're adults. And, if they commit a crime, they don't call them kids. And a lot of these quote unquote kids, not a lot, but there are some of these quote unquote kids that have kids of their own. So I look at them as adults, but we're not, we don't ask football players when there's lightning in the area whether they want to keep playing. Those decisions are made above the pay grade of the players and their health and safety reasons. And then are we doing these type of things for other endeavors that are associated with campus life? And the answer is we're not. A lot of the quote unquote kids want to go after their chosen field of endeavor, but the schools are not putting resources behind allowing them to do that and test every day and do all these things, put them in bubbles. They're doing it for football and basketball primarily. And that's because this is a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry and they need the revenue. And look, my job, my company needs the revenue. We all need the revenue. But that's why we're doing it. And I think we need to admit it.
Jay, actually, Scott, at Southern Connecticut, I want to get back to you, what the kids have said or your players about wanting to play. But as far as the economic impact, which is on a different scale than a university such as Duke, Division I, but what's your sense of the damage that's been done in that regard by not having a season?
With the players?
Well, financially first. I mean, not a number, but just a general tone to the athletic endeavor in the university.
Well, our numbers are going down every year. And with this pandemic, obviously, the revenue of people coming on campus, staying on campus, and coming to games, it's lost. And the numbers of, I think they're only allowed to maybe 2,000 people on campus this year. And I would say 3/4 of them are probably athletes. So the numbers have totally went down. Obviously, our school's hurting financially with the people not being able to be on campus. And obviously, it's a trickle-down effect. If you don't have the money that you're getting for admissions and students staying on campus and housing and residency, it trickles down to sports and athletics. And our budgets will be cut this year. They'll be cut next year. And who knows how long that'll affect us in sports at our school.
And so what's your relationship now with the guys on your team, your players who initially, as you said, we're feeling how you guys are stopping us from playing. All right, so now the emotions of that moment are past. Here we are, and they're in the bubble, and they're trying to at least work out and practice. How do you stay in touch with them, and what are they like now? What are their attitudes?
They understand. They understand it's a bigger picture than sports. And the NCAA granting them an extra year in college, a 5th year, definitely helps talking to them, because now they can get their masters, which they never dreamt about getting, or even thought about, maybe even finishing college. But now they have a chance to go 5 years and get a master's degree. They're excited about that, to better their lives. But also communicating over Zoom and meeting them face to face, with social distancing, it's better that way. And they're understanding, and they're sad, they're upset, but this is the way life is right now. And they're hungry for next year, bottom line. Yeah. So,
Jay, I know you've been, very outspoken of this ruse of amateurism. These guys, these kids, student athletes, whatever you want to call them, are professionals. This is a multi-billion-dollar business. Often, it's brought up of the college sports model. What do you make of the college sports model as it is now, and what do we need to do to fix it? I know that's a long, loaded question, but just as an entree into discussion.
Well, with regard to the amateurism piece of this business, I think it needs to go away. And, the NCAA said a few years ago that they were going to move forward with name, image, and likeness rights, which is simply just a stopgap in the discussion of compensation. I think the calculus was if we give them name, image, and likeness rights, we can stave off compensation for a period of time. And I don't know how long they thought that period of time would be. But my thing with the NCAA in this area is don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And at the time when the name, image, and likeness news came out from the NCAA, the first thing I said was they're not going to do this. And if they do, it's going to be so minimal in its effect as to be non-existent anyway. So it's going to be worthless. And what have they done? They've done nothing. They formed a committee, which they always do. Nothing's come from the committee except some recommendations. They tabled it at the convention, and now they're going before the U.S. Supreme Court for oral argument in the Alston case in March, so hoping that they're not ever going to have to pay and or to allow the athletes anything more than a scholarship. So I don't hold out much hope that the NCAA is going to do the right thing without being forced to. But I've never understood why college athletes are literally the only people that are limited in what they can earn or accept. That no other student, no other person is told that this is what you get and nothing more, and to have that upheld. I don't think it's going to last too much longer. But to me, athletes should have free market economic rights just like everyone else. And until we have that, it's going to be, in my judgment, a morally bankrupt system.
Let me direct this at both you guys. I'll begin with Jay. Bearing in mind everything that you just said, given the times that we're in, given the racial reckoning in this country, the social upheaval, the activism of the moment, do you think all of that adds velocity to the drive for those who would organize and act about, weaponize, if you will, these student athletes to get this reform sooner rather than later now?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that the athlete is more aware now of his and her power in the system than ever. And so the athletes are speaking out now where that never happened before. So they feel empowered, as they should, as the revenue drivers here, to affect real change. Now, whether that gets to the point of boycott or things like that in the future, I don't know that either. But the thing, Bob, that has surprised me the most about this has been the interest from lawmakers, both state and federal, in providing athletes with economic rights, whether it's name, image, and likeness or further. And I certainly don't think the NCAA is very happy about that. They've been lobbying Congress for an antitrust exemption. I don't think they're going to get it. I don't think either side in the Supreme Court battle in the Alston case can feel like they know what's going to happen. Who knows what the court is going to do? But having so many state legislatures pass laws, whether it's California, Florida, several others, is certainly accelerating this more than anything.
Scott, do you think this past year has added velocity towards this?
I would say kind of no, because like I said, economically, A lot of people are struggling. And I really don't know the answer to that, well, to be honest, because the way people are struggling, it's kind of hard to bring up that topic right now for a lot of schools without a huge income, as much income as they would have, would be coming in if the fans were packed, stands were packed, parking, they're making money off parking. So it's hard to judge if that's going to be a big factor on those kids' minds right now. But the thing about paying athletes too that scares me is if you pay the football player and the basketball player, you have to pay the women's tennis, the men's tennis, and who gets more money and how is that distributed and who makes that choice? Because if you do pay the basketball player and football player more, you're gonna anger a whole bunch of other athletes that work hard and practice just as hard and put the same amount of time in. Obviously, we know what sports bring the revenue in, but those other students are going to be a little upset about who gets the money, and that causes another problem on campus.
Yeah, I want to stay with you, Scott. And you have such a unique perspective because you were a first-round draft pick in both basketball and in baseball. And the way the NCAA model is set up now, just say you're a basketball player, but you're a pro baseball player. You can be a pro in baseball and make lots of money and bring it to campus. We've seen this, we've seen it with Kyler Murray. We saw it with Drew Henson at Michigan, who beat out Tom Brady. We saw Russell Wilson. But then, there's the Jeremy Bloom case where here's a world champion skier, but he can't have endorsements. How do we make this equitable, stay within Title IX? I think everybody agrees that paying players a salary is kind of a non-starter for a lot of reasons, but how do we fix this kind of hypocrisy and kind of level the playing field a little bit?
If you're going to pay an athlete, my thought is this: when they graduate, they don't have the structure in life to start their lives. So if we're going to do that, let's make an annuity for guys or girls who graduate, put some money in their pocket that way. They can go buy a suit. They can start their lives right off the bat after graduating. But something, and if you give a kid a whole bunch of money, we know right now they're not going to do the right things with the cash at a young age. So some kind of annuity, some kind of fund that they can get after they graduate, I think that'd be the right way to start, or to have someone even think of that or talk about that in the future for athletes if they're going to pay them. And it is like when I got paid to play baseball, I lost my scholarship, or I gave it back to UConn. So the Blue Jays did pay for my education. So it is unfair to a lot of athletes, but if you do sign a professional in one sport, obviously you lose your eligibility as an amateur in the others in that sport. So it's good and it's bad for athletes. But for me, I get back my scholarship, and UConn had another scholarship for our program.
Jay, what's been the biggest lesson that you think we have seen here, that you've seen people learn through the pandemic and through the prism of college basketball? Has there been something that's been a lights kind of a protocol or a practice established we can advance in the future, or better management? As you've watched various teams and coaches respond in different ways and show different levels of preparedness, frankly, among the different institutions, what have you learned, and what's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think we've all learned a lot in different ways about how resilient we can be through this. But I'm not sure there's been a lesson that we've learned from the conduct of the business that has been some sort of positive one. I think we've learned that we can adapt the business to keep going through almost anything, and we've shown what we're willing to do. But I'm not sure that that willingness to go forward and drive this train all the way to Indianapolis, no matter what, for the I'm calling it the NCAA bubble event this year instead of the NCAA tournament, because the NCAA trademarked battle in the bubble. So they said they'd never do a bubble, and they're doing a bubble. But
that's an NFL gangster move if ever there was one. Right?
It's really
Don't see Super Bowl, big game.
yeah, exactly. So on one hand, you admire that resiliency to press on forward, but the tired old rhetoric that we've used is by the wayside now. I mean, we've basically pitched that out the window. and we're not going to be able to go back to it. I don't think anybody's going to listen to it anymore, given what we have shown we're about this year. And I'm not saying that necessarily in a negative way. It's just sort of laid bare that, the idea that we would put players in complete isolation on their campuses when they don't have fellow students around them at all, and we would claim that this isn't pro sports it's kind of almost laughable.
But the distance between what you see in the games that you broadcast, Jay, and the reality of Scott coaching at Southern Connecticut, I mean, those are the twin poles here of the reality. You've got tuition-driven schools, even if they're state schools, modest budgets, modest expectations in terms of national profile, up against those schools that are the underpinnings and the girders of this of this. And so between the two, I mean, in this very conversation, we have Scott's guys are in a bubble but unable to play and champing at the bit to play.
Yeah, and that's one of the unfortunate parts about this is sort of the NCAA system leaves it up to the schools and the conferences as to how they're going to do certain things. The NCAA makes the decision on whether to hold a championship in a given sport, and when teams can start practicing and the protocols under which they can practice and play. But they leave almost like in a federalist system, they leave the decisions up to the institutions and to the conferences. But look, Division II and Division III do their business more in line with the stated values of the enterprise and their university's mission statements, more so than Division I does. But even Division II and Division III, honestly, that they'll a lot of Division III schools started football so that they knew that there would be a lot of people that wanted to play. And they'd better be able to retain students for 4 and sometimes 5 years and paying students. And to Scott's earlier point about paying everybody the same, just to get back to that just for 1 second, if I could, we don't even give scholarships to everybody now. They have scholarship limits in most sports. You can only have 4 scholarships in this sport or 12 in this sport. And, lacrosse has 40 players. You only have 12 and a half scholarships or whatever it is. So a lot of these athletes are paying their own way anyway. So the idea that we can't have college sports unless everybody gets the same thing, we've never had that. We don't have that now. And I don't know any endeavor where everybody's paid the same. I don't see why somehow athletes are so different than the rest of the world where we can all get along just fine based upon our merits and get paid at different things and get not everybody plays the same amount of minutes in a game. And they don't say oh my God, the best players playing more than the walk-ons. This is unsustainable. Athletes seem to get sort of a meritocracy.
We'd like to ask everybody on board, if for bandwidth purposes, if you could, until we get to the Q&A, if you could turn cameras off and as well as microphones. BJ?
Yeah, Jay, I want to come back to this battle in the bubble, this NCAA tournament as we're crossing the midpoint or crossed the midpoint in February or heading close to March. We're heading into conference tournament season. They're with COVID stoppages and the potential for some of these smaller conferences maybe not to be able to hold tournaments and then just getting to Indy and then what happens in Indy if there's a positive test. What's your sense of what this may look like? Do you think the NCAA has any idea? Are there any contingency plans? It seems like, it could be very, very touchy just getting there. And then once we're there.
Yeah, BJ, we're going to play. There's no question. Come hell or high water, we're playing. They lost the tournament last year. They were not insured for it. They were only insured for having lost ticket revenue last year. They weren't insured for losing. It never occurred to anybody that they could lose the entire tournament. So they weren't insured for it. They're not insured for it this year. So the only way to get paid out on their television contracts is to deliver the inventory, and they're going to deliver it. So that's going to happen. The interesting thing was, back to sort of the rhetoric about, the players want to play and competitors want to compete. We've heard of late, questions from coaches about should we play our conference tournament leading up to the NCAA tournament, because that provides risk going into the NCAA tournament that we may have a positive test and it could derail our ability to compete in the NCAA tournament, which kind of goes against the original point of, well, we want to play, players want to play. We're doing this because the players want to play. And look, if it's safe enough to play regular season games leading up to the conference tournament, why isn't it safe enough to play the tournament?
Because the pile of money is bigger in the tournament.
Exactly.
Tournament.
Exactly.
I mean, that's yeah.
But Bob, they're going to play the conference tournaments, because what some of the coaches didn't really think about was there's a lot of money tied to those tournaments as well, and you're going to play. And maybe the smaller conferences that are saying we make most of our money off of ticket revenue and people actually going to the games, and we don't have that this year. They may think that they should sacrifice that. But that goes to the integrity of the NCAA's bubble event, that if Gonzaga doesn't play in their conference tournament and some team that otherwise wouldn't qualify winds up winning it because Gonzaga doesn't play, that takes a spot away from somebody else. But if there are, going back to the original question, if there are positive tests in Indianapolis for the NCAA's bubble event, they're gonna have protocols in place to say, all right, was this person close to the team or close to, so they'll be able to, all right, you're out, but the team stays in. We're going to see that too. So it'll be different than some of the protocols we've seen during the regular season.
All of that raises questions, not just the how to administrate the tournament. But Scott, let me ask you, as a coach, when you got a situation where you've had teams, I'm sure you follow closely the game of the top Division I and top 25, like Baylor, for example, in a stretch where they may, I believe it, depending upon whether they play this coming weekend, be out for a stretch of 6 games, number 2 team in the country. Kentucky in this bizarro universe of this season is 6-13. I ask this partially as a fan, but partially as it gets to the whole measure of trying to figure out what are the important games and what networks will televise which games where. How do you assess the on-court product and the expectations in this season? How can you?
It's the teams that have been together obviously are playing much better and playing well, playing together as a team and competing at a higher level. But the teams like Kentucky, who get a new turnover of guys every year, are the ones that are struggling. So you kind of look at the teams that have their 5 starters back, or the most of their team back from last year's team. Those are ones that are doing well, and they're obviously like ranked number 1. Gonzaga has a lot of guys back. They're doing what they do usually every year. But it's tough for people to judge them if they haven't seen them. And it's tough for for those teams to get out of the hole without the television revenue being seen on TV as much as they usually are. And obviously not having you don't have a conference tournament, your season's a lot shorter, and where you can get that chance to make the NCAA tournament.
As a coach, what's the great challenge? I mean, if you've been off for 2 weeks because of COVID protocols, and you're at the money, here we go back to the money portion of the season. What's the greatest challenge in getting your team to come out of the gate like that? Because, I mean, we see example after example of teams that just stumble out of the gate after a COVID protocol break.
Just getting back, the chemistry back, getting guys in shape, working as a team, working as a unit. Because when a team does have COVID, a lot of times individually you can go work out because one person or 2 people are positive. But individually, if they test negative, they can work out. But to get that chemistry back, get your everybody on the same page offensively, defensively, and get your conditioning is the hardest thing. But those teams who do it and they work hard together and know each other well and they know their teams well, they're the ones that bounce back quicker than the other teams.
And Jay, talking about an unusual season, for example, Kentucky at 6-13, we've long, I guess, accepted the change in the game where even at Duke, we'd have 3-year players and 2-year players, and finally Mike would be recruiting 1-year players, and now half-year players. And admittedly, Jalen Johnson's injury situation bears into it, but now you've got someone leaving a team, leaving Duke before the end of the season to prepare for the NBA draft. This is what this season has presented, something like that. It shows you where we're at in terms of who's in school and why they're there.
Yeah, and obviously those go to some pretty deep questions. And, it's interesting with Duke and Kentucky being down, especially relatively down this season. I certainly understand where people would go to sort of the one and done thing. And I get that. But, since 2010, when John Calipari got to Kentucky, the two teams that have won the most NCAA tournament games, gone to the most Sweet 16s, the most Elite Eights, the most Final Fours, have been Duke and Kentucky. And they've done it with these young players. Now, this year has certainly been different. Jalen Johnson opting out at Duke is an interesting thing. You pointed out that he has undergone some injury ups and downs, and then has not played well of late, and has not been playing as much of late. And so I think he and his parents decided that rather than go through this roller coaster ride that could affect his draft status, he decided to pull the plug. And look, I had heard a number of times from my colleagues, which I respect greatly, the idea when I tried to have this discussion about playing through the pandemic and things. One of the responses I got, which quite frankly I thought was rather dismissive of the issue, was, "Hey, if you don't like it, you can opt out." I even had one coach say on the air, "Hey, if the media doesn't like it, they can opt out. You don't have to cover this if you don't want to," which I felt was dismissive of the underlying discussion we were trying to have. So, okay, when you say my way or the highway, or you can opt out if you want, don't be surprised when somebody takes the highway and opts out. And Jalen Johnson did that. And now the narrative is quitter. He's a quitter. And I get that given the historical nature of competition. But, he can't even see his parents right now. So that decision was made without being able to really sit down with and see his parents. It's a decision made over Zoom and made over the telephone. So I cut him a little bit of slack in this. I don't think this is going to be a trend that you're going to see a lot of players doing this, but we see it in football. Guys opt out of bowl games, meaningless bowl games all the time. So you may see more of this if a team's headed to the NIT. Maybe they will decide they don't want to play and it's not worth it.
Scott, I want to ask you about players' voices these days, and we know, and we discussed in our event on diversity and inclusion last week that the NBA is predominantly Black. In college basketball, the majority of players are Black. Do players today have more of a voice? I know here at Seton Hall, our men's basketball team, Miles Cale went to Delaware and marched, and was right out in front with the Black Lives Matter movement, and was supported by his teammates and the university here. So there's certainly more platforms, but as Jay pointed out, there's so much money involved. Do players today have more of a voice than when you're playing? Is it enough? Where are we going with, players and their voices?
100% so. I love it too. I mean, I love how athletes do have the platform and they use their platform in the right way. We need it more. As long as you do it in the right way, peacefully, and say and be educated on what you're speaking about. I think it's a great thing for these young kids to use that platform and speak about the wrongs of injustices that they face or they see. I think LeBron does a great job of doing it. And I think a lot of kids have followed that. Obviously, LeBron's one of the biggest athletes in the world. And kids do follow it. And I love how he has a stance on a lot of things. And he uses a platform and doesn't hide back behind his celebrity status. I hope they continue to do it. I hope it builds a bigger, stronger bond between their players and what they're fighting for. Because I think a lot of kids in this day and age don't understand life yet. They're on their phone. They're worried about social media. They don't understand what life and what people are fighting for. And the more people that get involved in and trying to fight the wrongs of this world, it'll be better for all of us.
Jay, what's your sense of, in this age of enhanced social activism and awareness in players' voices, how the power structure, given the fact that it's in college basketball, for example, spent the past year adapting on the fly, dealing with this industry, dealing with the growing voice of athletes, how they're prepared to react to that and work with that?
I think for the most part, coaches, teams, universities have responded positively. And again, it's for the most part. And obviously the situations are somewhat different, but I think we'll all recall, 5 years ago or so, when Colin Kaepernick was protesting, there were a lot of coaches that said, in the college space said, hey, anybody decides to do, we do it as a team. They tried to squelch that kind of thing. When Northwestern had the All Players United thing, and their coaching staff squelched that by saying anything we do as a team. We don't go out individually like that. Things have changed with regard to that, and you can see with the social justice statements that teams are making, and including during the anthem. College basketball teams during the anthem are protesting, and not, I shouldn't say protesting, but they're making statements during the anthem, and without fans there, some of it's not covered as much, but it's happening. And with the things they're doing with their T-shirts, what they're doing on social media, athletes have not only a platform, but they have access to the public now that they've never had before. And I see it a little bit differently than Scott in this regard. I think young people are more aware than they've ever been and more educated than they've ever been about social issues, and in a lot of ways are leading the way in this discussion. And they should be when you acknowledge that they are on in these institutions of higher learning that are supposed to be marketplaces of ideas. And we should be having these discussions, and athletes should be, as students, should be front and center in those.
Jay, the only thing I worry about is a lot of times they get their information from social media, and social media doesn't always have the truth being told. That's one. I agree with you 100%, but I hope they do more research in what they're talking about before they speak, because a lot of times I read Instagram or Twitter, and it's not always truth coming out of there. So I do agree with you about they're more up to date on what's going on in society and their issues. But please, before you speak, know what they're talking about. That's the only thing I hope for these kids.
Yeah, that's good advice for all of us, I would say.
Or as our friend Herm Edwards would always say to players, don't hit send. Not necessarily about social messages. Professor Schecter, are we at the moment when we can entertain questions?
Yes, absolutely. Enough hearing from Bob and myself. I want to give everybody opportunity to interact with our guests. So if you have a question, we'll get to as many as possible in the next 15 minutes or so. Raise your hand. I'll call on you. And when you're called on, if you could turn on your camera just when you ask your question, and let our guests know who you are, where you're from, if you're a student, what year you are, and then ask your question. So the floor is open. Questions for Jay Billis and Scott Burrell. Yes, we'll go to Timothy. You're up first.
I think you got on mute, Tim.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Scott. Hey, everybody. How you doing, Jay? My name's Tim Petriccioni. I actually was at Wake Forest with your son. I was a manager when Anthony was there, so good to see you. But Scott, how you doing as well? So I just had a quick question just regarding the conference tournaments and what you said now. Big East tournament is coming into MSG, or at least that's what's planned. So my first question would just be, what's your take on that and having fans and possibly selling tickets there? And my second question would be a school, like Gonzaga, who's, definitely the outright favorite to win their conference. If they were to opt out of their conference tournament and potentially give someone like a BYU, St. Mary's, a chance to get in, how would you take that in terms of the automatic qualifier for the NCAA tournament, seeing that some people, some teams might see that as an unfair advantage? Thank you very much.
Yeah, those are good questions, Timothy. What I would say is on the conference tournaments, whether they have fans or not is I think up to the jurisdiction, the health departments, and how they want to go forward. I mean, first and foremost, I think the schools and the NCAA would like to have the parents be able to go. But whatever they can do, I'm fine. Whatever the health department says we can do with the CDC and all that, I'm fine with. Whatever's the safest way to go. As far as the conference tournaments thing, we're going to play those. I'm convinced of that. There's too much money not to. Each conference, as you know, gets to determine how they hand out their automatic bid. They can do it via the tournament. They can do it via the regular season. They can arm wrestle. They can have a lottery. They can do whatever they want. But were I in charge of the NCAA selection committee that handles the tournament, I'd let everybody know that if you are an otherwise the best qualified team for the tournament, if any of them opt out, take Gonzaga. If Gonzaga opts out of the West Coast Conference tournament, then I would deem them as the automatic qualifier. And the rest of the tournament, hey, go forward and play, and you can all better yourselves for the at-large pool. But nobody's going to take away a spot because Gonzaga didn't play. And I would do that with every conference. Any team that opts out, your highest ranked team, I would deem them the automatic qualifier, and everybody else is playing for just to better themselves for the at-large. I wouldn't allow it.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Alex Rivas. You're up next, Alex.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me, right?
We got you.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for doing this. I just had a question about how college basketball is going to not really combat, but compete with the G League with players like Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga skipping college to go to the G League. What do you think the best way for college basketball is to entice the top prospects back to college basketball?
Scott, what's your take on that?
That's a great question. This is where Jay's answer about paying athletes helps a little bit. But you kind of got to sell. Those guys are going to, the lottery picks and the first round picks are most likely going to go to the G League. But you got to kind of sell to your kids the experience of college. They got to believe in what you're selling them, to believe in the education part, and believe the legacy they can leave at that university. People don't understand that the 4 years of college or 5 years of college you go are some of the best years that you could never get back if you don't go. So that's what you got to sell kids, and then hopefully they buy into it. The kids who are lottery picks, you can see them playing in the G League. They're getting a lot of money at a young age. You can see that happening. But just trying to do your best part selling what college is all about and college sports.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Trent Gagnon.
Hello again. Thank you for giving your time to be here. I was wondering what you guys thought of the success of the NCHC college hockey tournament, and if the success of that you think influenced the decision to go forward with March Madness, and if that hadn't gone according to plan, if you think things would be different right now.
Jay.
Nothing would be different right now based upon the success or failure of another endeavor. The NCAA was going to go forward with this tournament no matter what. And if they were able to play in any way, shape, or form, they were going to play. And that's why they did the bubble, was to ensure that they'd be able to play. Look, I don't mean to make it sound completely and totally craven. I do think people want to see the players be allowed to play and to have normal life, and to have everybody be able to do their brackets and all that stuff. But that's a secondary concern, because frankly, they're not as concerned about other students and them being able to do what they love to do. This is about money, and we're gonna make this money no matter what. And I don't want to say that we're going to unnecessarily put health at risk, but we're certainly going to contradict ourselves in the process, and they're not going to care about that. Like, when was the last time you saw Mark Emmert? I mean, he's been conspicuously silent.
Seriously, is he still in office? I know I've retired, and I don't follow on a daily basis, but the point you just made, I said, my God, you're right. I don't think I've seen him quoted anywhere for 10 months.
He doesn't want to answer these questions, and I wouldn't want to if I were him either, because he's going to get caught in all these contradictions. And, at the beginning of this, Bob, one of the things that also disappointed me was that the NCAA didn't, have, I thought they should have had briefings after they canceled the tournament on COVID and on protocols and on what's going on and things like that. Because all the time they were saying, well, we have this expert medical panel and the SEC has this expert medical panel. And like, well, what are they telling you? And don't you have an obligation as federally funded institutions to share this with the public? And the answer was they didn't think they did. and I thought that was a failure. But I don't blame him because it's if he had to answer these questions, I don't think he can answer them. And so the best thing is not to do anything and have his State of the Union address at the tournament, and he'll get a few virtual questions, and that'll be the end of it. And they'll get to the end of it, and that'll be, and bank the money, and they can move on.
Thank you. Appreciate your input.
All right, let's go to Blaze Panzini. You're up next.
Hello, just thank you guys for being here. My question is pertaining to the upcoming lawsuit. Obviously, it's going to happen this summer, and the ramifications of if the NCAA gets their way or if there doesn't. What's the next step? Because obviously, if the NCAA wins, would you propose that, I know some players have tried it before, but a union to kind of like a collective bargaining agreement or something like that? Thank you.
Yeah, Scott, we talked about the voice of players and speaking out and on social issues, but to the existential first-person issues of their own life. And we'll just make this division one for the sake of discussion. Do you think that current-day athletes will be sufficiently motivated if given an adverse court decision and the realities of looking at way they have been treated, end quote, during the pandemic, to say it's time to organize officially?
I do think there will be a time. I'm not sure if this is the time because, like I said before, there's going to be so many other things that they have to worry about during this pandemic time. But there will be a time when they're going to organize and decide on what they're going to do with their likeness and should they be getting paid all this money. But I don't know if that's going to happen right now in forming unions. They're going to form a union right now, to be honest, because you kind of want to you need to see people. You can do everything over Zoom, but to be in one room, it makes it a lot easier to format a unified force.
And Jay, it's always been a good talking point, organizing, unionizing, end quote, but the churn in the, quote, workforce is such, and the most visible people are only in the workforce for a year or two. There are a lot of practical issues and obstacles to overcome here. It's a nice theory.
Yeah, I mean, unionization is a complex issue that goes to both state and federal law. There are a lot of things that go into it. I don't find sort of the transient nature of college athletes, the fact that some of them are only in school for 5 years all the way down to 1 year, to be an impediment or a barrier to pay. We have 1 year contracts in just about everything. So 1 year contract in athletics wouldn't be that big of a deal. But to the original question about the Supreme Court case, the Alston case, that's going to go before the court for oral argument in March and could be decided by the fall. Nobody knows what the court's going to do, but to the question, if the court sided with the NCAA and basically allowed the NCAA to make whatever rules it wants in limiting athletes, that will not be the end of this, because Congress could certainly come in and pass legislation that would overrule anything or preempt anything that the Supreme Court decided. The Supreme Court's the final say on the way things are now, but it's not the final say, period. Congress would have the final say if it wanted to. And I do think there's some movement in Congress to allow athletes some economic rights there. If it doesn't go all the way to full pay for play, certainly in the NIL space.
Certainly if this new Congress, you would think would be more inclined to that with the Democratic majority in the House, yeah.
As we're talking about players' voices, we have the foremost expert on unions here, here at Seton Hall with us, Charlie Grantham, who is the former executive director of the NBA Players Association. So, Charlie, I know you've talked a lot about players' voices and how their voices would be heard, whether it's a connection to the pro unions. What are your views on, should the players, organize and how they would do that?
It's a good question, guys. Of course, I've been speaking this since, Scott, you may have been a rookie at that time, back in 1990.
Yes, I was.
Again, I wrote a piece about it's time to give athletes a share in college. And if you recall, that was, I guess, maybe in the early 80s, we created this thing called revenue sharing and a salary cap.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? the NCAA capitalized on that and created their own salary cap called a scholarship. And they have everybody in the revenue share except the student athlete. So from my perspective, this is something we've been kicking around for 40 years. When I first testified in Congress in 1983, it was about the eligibility, okay? Because a guy named Herschel Walker wanted to go and play football and get paid. Well, why not? But at the same time, what I was able to observe in that hearing was that the NFL, the NBA, and the NCAA were like very good buddies. As a matter of fact, they had a rule at that time that said you had to complete your 4 years of eligibility, not 4 years to get your degree, but 4 years of eligibility before you could be drafted. So what did that do? That was at the same time, Jay, that the Oklahoma and the Regent Court legal clash created this concept called revenue sharing for them because they were able to go out and sell their own games. So this idea that there should be revenue sharing, college sports, now that they're about a $14 billion industry, has capitalized on the pro sport model, except they have had one less partner, the student athlete. So from my perspective, the time has definitely come. And if I were the executive director of the NBA players and the NFL players 15 years ago, I would have offered every student athlete an opportunity to be a sort of a junior member, an associate member of my union for free. Because I think now is the time that all of our athletes, LeBron James, football player, everybody's talking about it. But now's the time for the action, and that they could lead this movement. If the NFLPA and the NBPA and the Major League Baseball PA and the Hockey League players, if they decided, and by the way, at some point, Jay, as a lawyer, you know this, the NCAA has done very well in terms of playing the shell game with Congress. They've been able to get away with this for the last 40 years. But they have the right to accept or acknowledge someone to represent the athlete. And they have chosen not to do that over all this time for the very simple reason is that they continue to say it's amateur and they're not employees. But guess what? This pandemic has shone a bright light on that whole question of whether or not student athletes are employees. Because I, as a professor, teaching remotely, the students who are not going to class, but if we go back to those Power 5 conferences in football, these guys had to sign liability waivers to come back to campus to practice and to play. So if there is a time that can really talk about whether or not you're an employee or non-employee, and the NCAA continues to use the 13th Amendment to justify their system. And I often question that, yeah, that speaks to slaves and prisoners. Which one are they? Which one are they? So the time is right, but I think it speaks to leadership and it speaks to a commitment that the pro unions would have to take on. And I'm not sure that they have figured that out yet. It's a long-winded answer, but
it's a great one.
That would scare the collegiate status quo. They would be going out the window if the pro unions had, as you said, the gumption, the stones, and the ability.
It's time. It's time.
We'll see.
All right. Let's go with one more question. Let's go with Ashley Ruiz. You can have our final question.
Hi. Oh, hello. I'm a freshman at Seton Hall. I'm actually one of Mr. Schecter's students. I have actually 3 questions. So thank God I got the final question. I want to say, first, do you think that we could see a turnaround or at least an attempt to appease please athletes while still retaining a resemblance of the old structure of the old college model? My second question is, do you think athletes have more leverage with their relationship with schools? And if so, how will they use it to their advantage?
An attempt to appease. That's a great choice of words.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, like to appease, like
Yeah,
to please.
To please, yeah.
Athletes, I'm sorry.
No, it could be the same thing, though, actually, if you're to appease, to meet. So in other words, that your question is, do you think there would be a move by university, the NCAA, the power structure, to meet demands of the athletes?
Yeah, while still retaining their own structure, of course. Yeah. Because that's their argument.
Yeah, that's a delicate balance, Jay, right?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, do I think they're going to do some things around the edges to make it seem like they're doing the right thing, or what I consider to be the right thing? Yeah. I mean, look how long we had to fight over athletes getting food. It used to be that you were allowed one meal a day, and that we were arguing over whether if a team had a 6 a.m. practice, they could provide a bagel to the players. And when would it be considered a meal? If you had, they said you can have fruits, nuts, and bagels. And if you had, so you could have grapes, but
what
not
kind
grapes.
of bagels?
But Bob, I mean, this was a big brouhaha over the years, and it was such an embarrassment to the NCAA. They finally changed it when people were making such a joke about it. But I actually had an NCAA person come to me and say, so you think that schools should be able to feed players whatever they want, whenever they want? And I said, yeah, I do. And said, so they could feed them steak and lobster 3 meals a day. And I said, well, first of all, I don't think they're going to do that. But if they want to, yeah, I think they should be able to do it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And finally, they relented and changed the rule, and everything's fine. The world's still on its axis. And to Professor Grantham's point earlier about, the NCAA has been in bed with the professional leagues. And, first of all, we had a question a little bit earlier about the court case that's before the Supreme Court. And one of the interesting things on the antitrust side is the NCAA isn't a league. It is a collection of leagues. So all the NCAA really does is they run a basketball tournament. They're not a league. And so it's a collection of little NFLs and NBAs. Like the Southeastern Conference is its own NFL and NBA. They make their own rules. They have their own media rights contracts. Same thing with the ACC, the Big Ten, all that. That's going to be the basis, I think, on which this case is ultimately decided. Now, I may be wrong in that. I'm not an antitrust expert. I'm just an attorney. But I think we're going to see a lot of that. And to the point about, like, the NCAA is going to continue to fight this because they've had their way for so long. They don't want to give the athletes anything. At the very beginning of all this, like, amateurism is whatever the NCAA defines it at any given time. That is literally the truth. When all this first started, amateurism was just a way for the elites not to have to compete against the common man who couldn't afford to compete. And then back then they said no scholarships at all. And then they said scholarships. Now it's scholarship and a stipend. So we're increasing it all the time. And I agree with Professor Grantham. Like, right now we have laid bare, these are essential workers to the point of being employees. And I think it's going to make it awfully difficult for the NCAA to make that argument before the Supreme Court with a straight face that this is just students playing against students like it's intramurals. It's not.
And to the question that Ashley raised about leverage, Scott, I think the tone of what we've talked about is that there is a greater leverage now, a sense of leverage, especially at the power schools.
Yeah, there is. And like you said, you take advantage of your celebrity status and go for what you want right now. Because, like, we all agree that athletes deserve something. You got to try to see what that is, though. And like Jay said, it's improving, but it has to improve more drastically. And Charles and Mr. Grantham gave us a great example of why. What the history has brought this situation to a point. Why it's brought it to a point, and something needs to be done.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to ask the last question, Professor Schecter, if I could have, Scott. And I've been itching to ask you this, Scott. off The Last Dance, which, as I said, you became a fixture of the American cultural firmament and loving it. And there's Jay, who knows Michael as well. At any point during that '98 season, when you were newly arrived on the Bulls and Michael was doing what Michael was doing, did you, as a former professional pitcher, want to get this guy who tried out in baseball into a batting cage to kind of even the score here?
No, because if I did, I would be pitching to him and I would have hit him with a pitch. So, then I'd have brought more problems to myself. So no, I just knew I had to listen to what he said and get better and prove myself to be part of that championship team. So I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed every bit of it, though. I enjoyed every bit of it.
Guys, for both Professor Schecter and myself, deepest personal and professional thank you for being with us. I know all in attendance today took away so much, and I deeply appreciate it.
An honor, as always.
Oh my, thank you very much.
Well, yes, thank you to our guests. Thank you to Bob Ley. Thank you all for joining us. Please join us next week for the part 3 in our 3-part speaker series in and around Black History Month. It's going to be in and around baseball. As Bob said, we learned an awful lot today. So thank you to our guests. Thank you all for being here. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.